The holidays are here, and with them come warmth, cheer, and terror. Christmas isn't always about joy and laughter. Sometimes it's about what lurks in the shadows of festive traditions. Welcome to Nightmare for Giggles, and I am the Tales Keeper, where we turn cozy nights into sleepless ones. Today we're diving into 3 chilling Christmas horror stories that will make you think twice about the season of joy. Before we begin, don't forget to put on those headphones for the best audio experience. Story 1. The Haunted Elf on the Shelf. In December 2019, the Johnson family of Chicago decided to embrace the elf on the shelf craze. They purchased their elf from a small holiday market downtown. It wasn't a big box store version, but a handmade replica that looked even more charming with its slightly unique features. A crooked smile and larger than usual glassy eyes. "It'll be fun," Melissa Johnson told her husband Tom as their kids, Ethan and Lily, squealed with excitement. They named the elf Buddy and placed him on the mantel. Like many families, the Johnsons moved Buddy around each night, creating scenarios for the kids to discover in the morning. The first few days were magical. Buddy baked cookies, went fishing in the sink, and even got caught in the Christmas tree. But then, things started to change. One night, Melissa awoke to a faint tapping noise. She nudged Tom awake, thinking it was one of the kids wandering around. But when she checked their rooms, both Ethan and Lily were sound asleep. Returning to bed, Melissa passed the living room and froze. Buddy was no longer on the mantel. Instead, he was sitting on the coffee table, his head turned toward the hallway as if watching her. "Tom," she whispered, shaking her husband awake. "Did you move Buddy?" Tom groggily denied it, chalking it up to Melissa forgetting where she had placed him. But Melissa was certain. She'd put Buddy on the mantel before bed. The next morning, the kids were thrilled to see Buddy's new spot. Melissa and Tom laughed it off, but unease lingered. Over the next few nights, Buddy seemed to change positions on his own. At first, it was subtle. A shift in his angle, his arms moved slightly, then it became undeniable. One evening, Melissa found Buddy sitting at the dining table with a knife from the kitchen drawer resting in his lap. The kids giggled, thinking it was another prank by their parents. Melissa didn't say anything but felt a chill run down her spine. Things escalated when Lily began waking up crying. "Buddy's talking to me," she sobbed one night. "He says I'm not being good enough." Tom tried to reassure her it was just a dream, but Ethan chimed in. "I heard him too. He's laughing in the middle of the night." Melissa's unease turned to fear. She decided to put Buddy away in a box in the attic, hoping it would calm the situation. But the next morning, Buddy was back on the mantel, sitting exactly where the family had first placed him. Tom accused Melissa of bringing him back down as a joke. Melissa, pale and shaking, swore she hadn't touched him. The kids insisted they hadn't either. That night, the family heard footsteps in the hallway. Tom got up, armed with a baseball bat, but found nothing. Buddy, however, was now perched on the staircase, his glassy eyes staring down at them. Terrified, Melissa decided to get rid of the elf for good. She threw Buddy into the fireplace, watching as the flames engulfed him. The family sighed in relief, thinking the nightmare was over. But the next morning, Buddy was back on the mantel. His edges were charred, his crooked smile more menacing than ever. Melissa contacted the vendor from the holiday market, desperate for answers. The vendor, an elderly woman, listened quietly before saying, "That's not one of mine. I've seen that elf before, though. You need to leave it alone." Melissa pressed for more details, but the woman hung up, refusing to speak further. The family decided to leave the house and stay with relatives for the rest of the holiday season. They packed their belongings and loaded the car. As they pulled out of the driveway, Ethan gasped. "Buddy's in the back seat," he whispered. Tom slammed the brakes and turned around. Buddy was sitting upright in Ethan's booster seat, his glassy eyes fixed on the family. In a panic, Tom grabbed the elf and hurled it into a dumpster down the street. The family drove off, leaving the neighborhood behind. They never returned to their home, selling it in the spring. The new owners reported strange occurrences, lights flickering, items moving on their own, and and faint giggles in the night, but Buddy was never seen again. Story 2. The Cursed Christmas Sweater. It's the season for ugly sweaters, festive cheer, and holiday parties. But what if that perfect Christmas sweater came with a terrifying price? In December 2021, Allison Baker, a 32-year-old teacher from Denver, was frantically preparing for her school's annual holiday party. The theme that year was ugly Christmas sweaters, and prizes were awarded for the tackiest outfits. Short on time, Allison decided to swing by a local thrift store. She spotted it immediately, a garish, bright red sweater adorned with blinking LED lights, jingling bells, and a disturbingly detailed reindeer face. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow her as she held it up, but Allison laughed it off. Perfectly ugly, she thought, and bought it without a second thought. The cashier's smile faltered when she rang it up. "You're buying that?" the older woman asked. "People keep returning it." "Why?" Allison asked, puzzled. The woman shrugged. "They say it's weird, but I'm sure it's fine." That evening, Allison slipped the sweater on to test it out. It was tight, far snugger than it looked on the hanger. The fabric itched against her skin, but she chalked it up to cheap materials. Standing in front of her mirror, she laughed at how ridiculous she looked. But then, as she turned away, she swore she saw the reindeer's eyes blink in the reflection. She spun around, heart racing, but the sweater was as still as ever. Shaking her head, she dismissed it as her imagination. The night passed uneventfully, though Allison woke up with an odd soreness in her shoulders. She also noticed faint red marks around her neck, as if the sweater had been tighter than she remembered. The day of the holiday party, Allison arrived early, feeling oddly fatigued. Her colleagues admired the sweater, laughing at its over-the-top design. But as the day wore on, people started avoiding her. "Is something burning?" one coworker asked, wrinkling her nose. Another said she felt dizzy whenever she stood too close to Allison. By the end of the evening, Allison was feeling strange herself. Her reflection in the restroom mirror looked off. Her eyes seemed darker, her grin wider. For a moment, she thought she heard faint jingling bells, even though the room was silent. She left the party early, the sweater clinging to her uncomfortably. That night, Allison woke abruptly to a jingling sound. Her room was dark, but the blinking lights on the sweater, which she'd tossed on her chair, cast eerie shadows across the walls. She sat up, her breath hitching as the sweater seemed tighter than before, as if the fabric had constricted itself. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She grabbed it, only to see dozens of text messages from an unknown number. Each one read the same: "You belong to me now." Panicking, she ripped the sweater off, only for the fabric to cling to her like a second skin. She struggled, gasping as the bells jingled mockingly. Finally, she managed to pull it off and threw it into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed it. But the next morning, it was back in her closet, perfectly intact. By now, Allison was too terrified to wear the sweater, but it seemed to haunt her every move. She would hear jingling bells wherever she went. Objects in her home shifted positions. At night, she felt phantom hands tightening around her throat. Desperate, she contacted the thrift store, but the clerk who sold her the sweater was no longer there. The manager claimed no one matching her description had ever worked there. Allison's final act was to try and burn it again. This time she doused it in lighter fluid, setting the blaze herself. As the flames roared, she heard it. A low, guttural laugh echoing through her house. The fire went out almost instantly, leaving the sweater untouched. A week later, Allison was reported missing. Friends and family who searched her home found no trace of her, except for the sweater neatly folded on her bed. Its reindeer face now bore a twisted grin, its glassy eyes staring into the room. The sweater was eventually donated back to the same thrift store. Employees reported feeling uneasy around it, but it remains there to this day, waiting for its next owner. Story 3. The Reindeer Skinwalker. A snowy night, a quiet town, and a lone reindeer that's always watching. But what if it's not just an animal? In December 2020, Aaron White, a 42-year-old contractor from a small Alaskan town, was driving home from a late job. The roads were icy, and snowflakes danced in his headlights. As he rounded a bend near the edge of town, his high beams illuminated a reindeer standing in the middle of the road. Aaron hit the brakes, the tires skidding slightly. The reindeer didn't move. It just stared at him, its eyes glowing faintly in the light. He honked the horn, but the animal didn't flinch. After a moment, Aaron maneuvered his truck around it, muttering, "Weird animal." When he glanced in his rearview mirror, the reindeer was still there, watching him. The next day, Aaron's routine was normal until he stepped outside to warm up his truck. There, standing at the edge of his driveway, was the same reindeer. Its antlers were stark against the gray morning sky, and its glowing eyes seemed fixed on him. "You lost or something?" Aaron muttered, trying to shake off the unease. He shooed it away, but the reindeer didn't move. Feeling unnerved, he climbed into his truck and drove off, glancing in the mirror. The reindeer was still there, its head turning to watch him as he disappeared down the road. Over the next few days, Aaron saw the reindeer everywhere. It stood at the edge of the construction site where he worked, just beyond the tree line. It appeared outside the diner where he grabbed lunch, its breath visible in the frigid air. And every night, it was waiting for him near his driveway. It never moved, never came closer, but its unblinking stare followed him wherever he went. One evening, Aaron decided he'd had enough. Armed with a flashlight and a rifle, he marched outside. The reindeer stood near the edge of his yard, illuminated by the faint glow of his porch light. "All right, you creepy bastard," Aaron growled. "Go on, get out of here." The reindeer didn't move. Its glowing eyes locked onto his. Aaron raised the rifle, aiming just above the creature's head. He fired a warning shot, the crack of the gun echoing through the silent night. The reindeer flinched but didn't flee. Then it began to change. Aaron watched in horror as the reindeer's body twisted and elongated. Its legs stretched unnaturally, the joints bending backward. The antlers grew sharper, curling like twisted branches. Its fur receded in patches, revealing gray, leathery skin underneath. The glowing eyes intensified, and a guttural, almost human-like groan escaped its throat. Aaron stumbled backward, his flashlight shaking as the heart pounding. Aaron turned and bolted for his truck. He could hear the creature behind him, its grotesque limbs crunching through the snow. He threw open the door, jumped inside, and slammed it shut just as the thing reached the driver's side window. The creature pressed its elongated face against the glass, its glowing eyes staring into Aaron's soul. He fumbled with the keys, starting the engine as the creature's claws scraped against the door. With a roar, the truck sped down the icy road. Aaron didn't stop until he reached the town's small police station. When he explained what had happened, the officer on duty looked skeptical, but agreed to check his property. By the time they arrived, the yard was empty. Only deep, erratic tracks in the snow remained, leading back into the woods. Aaron didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every whistle of the wind set his nerves on edge. The next morning, he found hoofprints leading from the woods to his bedroom window. He moved out of town a week later. Neighbors who stayed behind claimed to see the reindeer near the tree line, its glowing eyes watching their homes. Some said it was just a legend, a trick of the light. But Aaron knew better. He'd seen the truth, and he'd never go back. The holidays may bring joy, but as we've seen, they can also bring unspeakable terror. If you enjoyed these stories, or if they made you sleep with the lights on, be sure to like, subscribe, and share your own creepy holiday experiences in the comments. This is Nightmare for Giggles, wishing you a haunting holiday season. Until next time, sleep tight.